All right, so we're going to do one more thing, and then I'm going to let you have a little break, and then I have an activity for you, so stay tuned on that. But first we're going to have our second spotlight time, where I'm going to invite Kofi to come on up. And I'm super excited that Kofi's going to share the story of Monumental. Kofi's the co-founder of Monumental, and he'll tell you a little bit more about what they're doing in the housing space. And I think it'll touch on a lot of the themes that this panel has raised, too, around accessing capital, having the skills to leverage the use of capital. I'm not going to steal all of Kofi's story for him, but come on up, Kofi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't a trick question. I have to get clapping like Alfred up here. So I'm Kofi Hope. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Monumental, and we're a Toronto-based social business that works to use research, design, and strategic thinking to build bold solutions to complex issues facing cities and urban issues across Canada. But before I was at Monumental, I spent many years on the ground in the social service sector. I was the founder and inaugural executive director of the C Centre for Young Black Professionals, which worked to support youth with complex barriers around that journey from crisis to stability to starting on a career path. And we started out in a neighborhood many of you may know in Northwest Toronto, the Jane Finch community, at the Black Creek Community Health Centre. And I remember working there, collaborating with youth workers and social workers to support not just youth in our program, but any young people that came through the doors of the health centre. And over those years of supporting hundreds of youth, I saw firsthand that of all the issues young people faced, no issue was more protracted or difficult to find solutions to than when a young person had a housing crisis. And you could see them, when they showed up in the center with kind of all their worldly belongings in 2 shopping bags that they walked up in. Or sometimes you didn't know. It was only when they pulled you aside and you walked off to the corner and they told you, hey, I've actually been couch surfing for the last couple weeks. Or they said, I'm in a situation right now that is so unsafe and dangerous, I have to get out right away. And in all of those cases, we would come together as team members, we'd trade suggestions, we'd call up contacts, we'd be frantically online looking for rental ads. And it was just so hard to provide young people with this basic need, the need for safe and secure housing. What a challenge it was in a city going through one of the worst housing crises in the world. Now, friends, the statistics show that all communities in Canada, but particularly racialized communities and most acutely Black and Indigenous communities, face major disparities around housing security, around rental discrimination, and access to home ownership. And so when I left my role as a frontline ED with a community agency, I had a real passion to learn more about the housing system and to explore solutions to this generational crisis that faces Canadian society today. So flash forward a few years. Monumental is a thing, and Zara, my co-founder, and I are finding ourselves working more and more in the space of social impact in real estate development. And we're getting the privilege, the incredible privilege, to take part in teams that are part of some of the biggest development projects in Canada, plotting the future of neighborhoods that will house thousands or tens of thousands of people. And as we move through this space, we also noted that in this industry of real estate development, which I'll add, broadly makes up about 10% of our economy and employs nearly 300,000 people, we saw with these different groups we interacted with that as you went up the org chart, as you went up to the C-suites and the ownership roles, there were very few faces that looked like us. Personally, we could see this industry best positioned to respond to the housing crisis had a severe underrepresentation of racialized folks in leadership, even though racialized communities were disproportionately impacted by the housing crisis. And I may add, it's also an industry that study after study has shown was to be in need of innovation, of new thinking, of boost to its productivity and business practices. And we looked at all of these data points from our travels and we said, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here. And so we reached out to FFC and we said, hey, we think we understand this problem. We think there's a need for training programs and capacity building in this space. We know that exists in the US, but we're not sure exactly what's needed in Canada. Can we do some research together and explore this? And we're so thankful that they got it at FFC. They said, yes, please explore this. And so we got to take our lived experiences, our professional insights, and flesh them out with strong and grounded primary and secondary research. And along the way, we affirmed our instincts. We saw, yes, the lack of representation in this industry was a documented fact. But at the same time, we also saw a growing market opportunity. Because for the longest time in this country, since World War II at least, and in places like Toronto from even earlier, we in Canada have put significant restrictions in place around home building, preventing us from building certain types of housing in certain places. Particularly, we've made it hard to build small-scale rental. Those kind of 4 to 8 units, the 2 to 3 story housing complexes that are extremely common in big cities all over the world. Right? We have so little of this in North America that we created a name for it. We call it the missing middle, right? It's what sits between single-family homes and those 30-story mega towers we see all over downtown. And experts and government were saying it's clear that building more housing like this, building more missing middle housing, was a critical step in solving the housing crisis. But here's the best part. This was a scale that was actually much more possible for folks from new communities to step into. Building a condo tower is a massive undertaking. And most of the challenge is actually around assembling the financing you need to do it. So if you're not coming to that game independently wealthy or with a bunch of rich friends, you're probably not going to get that first project to move forward. But there are many people from our diverse communities who own a home, or maybe own a second home, one that could easily be converted from housing a single family into housing 4 or 5 families. And okay, maybe it's not easy, but working at this scale and this price tag is something that is much more accessible for first-time entrepreneurs. And as we were doing the research, we saw the reports were there, it was in the news, government broadcasting that, hey, we're going to make it easier in the near future to build at this level, and we're going to create incentives to get more people in the game. And so we said, bingo, we have a clear problem. The housing crisis and the lack of racialized folks leading companies and projects in this space. And we also have a clear synergy between a solution at a level that would help solve the housing crisis, but would also be an accessible entry point for BIPOC entrepreneurs. And so it just felt like this was an extremely fertile area to explore developing a new program. And so we went back to FSC. And from this was born the first ever in Canada real estate development incubator program for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, FutureBUILDS, or what we now call the FutureBUILDS Incubator. And with FSC support, we did our pilot program. We looked at models like this from the United States, but we also built off of our research where we talked to aspiring real estate entrepreneurs or those who had actually been able to break through the space and be successful. And they told us, hey, if you build a program like this, we need 3 things. The first was they talked about they needed more social capital. Real estate development is a space where connections and contacts are so critical to move forward, and our communities many times did not have a history in the space, so the connections they needed were not there. So that was one. Number 2, they said we need technical training, as even professionals working for development companies or as contractors in the space, we rarely get a deep understanding of the entire development process, of all the stages, right? Of how you navigate government approvals, how you coordinate the professional services you need, how you then think about managing construction, how you build out an accurate budget and make sure you're sticking to it. And that brings us to the final point of what they said they needed, which was support getting access to financing. Not being able to get it from big banks, so many folks turn to B or C lenders. And I'll just give one story. We had someone, they had been a contractor, decided to get into real estate development. They had their first site, they had to go to a C lender. And they literally talked about going to give them a check for that site, and they showed up 3 minutes late to the office. They literally saw the people locking the door on the other side. 3 minutes late, they had to pay a $50,000 penalty. After that, they said, never trying in this again. So that access to capital and how to navigate lending and financing was the third critical piece. And so we said, okay, let's go. Let's build a program around it. Let's embed the Monumental culture and think about these three clear and distinct learning outcomes. We had our first pilot. We had 30 individuals across 25 projects join. We had about 150 applications for those 30 spaces. And the pilot itself, engagement was off the chart. We saw real success in learning outcomes and also in concrete housing outcomes. We saw graduates move forward their projects, get their approvals, finish their drawings, and put shovels in the ground. Just last week, one of our graduates from that first cohort wrote to everyone to say, guess what? I just got approved to build an 8-story building on a piece of land I owned. Something they had never thought was possible when they started the program. We have another individual, took the program, then actually spent a couple years in the United States going into historical Black communities that had low prices of value, looking for homes that had fallen into disrepute, bought them up, did a reno, but did it in a way that it remained accessible and affordable to people in community. Now they're bringing that business back to Canada, and they've got a couple properties around the Little Jamaica area, and they're just trying to work through the math. And a third example, 2 individuals who went to that cohort, met each other, and they have now launched an investment fund specifically targeting folks like themselves, aspiring first-time developers looking to do missing middle housing. All of this was part of a program model that built a variety of pieces that included the community building that you could get from retreats and community dinners. We matched that with in-class learning with faculty. We had experiential learning, so we'd get on our hard hats, jump on a bus, and go to different sites all around the city so people could see this in action. And then on top of it, we had industry mentorship, which gave one compelling incubator offering. And it was filled with those classic Monumental touches to just make it feel a little more human. We made sure we had diverse speakers that represented folks in the room. We did crowdsourcing at the beginning so that people's snacks, their food, their music were things that they felt culturally related to and safe. And we used human-centered design to make sure our curriculum and all of our visual assets were as thoughtfully put together and as intuitive to use as possible. And the pilot was a great success. And to be honest, those 30 folks were just a drop in the bucket. We began holding events and we'd get hundreds of people showing up saying, we need a place like this, where those of us who felt marginalized in this industry can find community, collaboration, and connection. And also from the industry side, CEOs of existing development companies, entrepreneurs, architects, planners, investors, all started coming to the table saying, we want to be a part of what you're doing. And this momentum led to a much larger investment from FSC. And so over the last year, FutureBUILDS went from a single pilot to a whole suite of programmings. We brought back the incubator in a bigger and more impactful way, now with dedicated faculty and a fully updated curriculum. We did more events in community. We launched a new program for youth called FutureBUILDS Next. We now have a fully online curriculum that this month will be available for free to folks all across Canada. And we were able to kind of have a capstone of a conference that we did last month. I think a few people in the room were there. Mayor Olivia Chow opened it up, and it was standing room only as folks, whether they were tradespeople, entrepreneurs, advocates, affordable housing champions, or students, came together to learn, connect, and build this momentum, this movement around diversity in real estate development that FutureBUILDS has been a part of. We're so proud at this point that we've now served thousands of individuals over the last few years for the FutureBUILDS journey. And we continue to expand. I mentioned that we debuted FutureBUILDS Next, and I'll talk about that briefly. That program is dedicated to building capacity of Black youth around leadership in affordable housing development. So again, we saw a need and we built around it. Not only do Black youth face the most pronounced employment and labor market mobility issues of any group in the Toronto area, but there's also a noted need for building more capacity in the Black nonprofit housing space in the city. The Canadian government has been out of the funding affordable housing and its construction game for a long time. Now the government is back and has been back, over the last 8 to 10 years in a real meaningful way. But capacity is not always there in the sector, and particularly Black organizations, which had not had this history to manage affordable housing builds before. Now there was a lack at the table when these funding opportunities were in place. And so for us, a priority was, how do we seed the next generation of leaders across community organizations in Toronto so they would be able to receive and manage these projects? The program itself included a trip to Halifax, where many participants came back saying this was a life-changing opportunity, where we got to network with the oldest standing Black community in Canada to talk about the past and future of Black housing solutions. We walked the land in Africville with an original resident as our guide, who spoke about growing up in a historically Black community where they would play in the ocean during the day, and they would cook mussels and other seafood around the bonfire with their parents at night, where people worshipped and raised their families, even as the city surrounded them with garbage dumps, slaughterhouses, medical facilities for individuals with communicable diseases, and where for decades they were pressured to leave until eventually, with federal government funding, the municipality forced them off the land, bulldozing people's church in the middle of the night and breaking up this community with no compensation or due process for restitution. So we had a heavy morning where we walked the land in Africville, and then the next day, we walked the land at the largest investment in Black housing made in Canadian history. Upper Hammonds Plains Community Land Trust, anchored in a historical Black community outside of Halifax, had just received $61 million towards a housing development, and we got to walk with the founder and that community as they were just pouring the foundations. The historical significance of those couple days in Halifax was so present with us, and this trip that was full of laughter, some tears, and a whole lot of learning brought back 15 young leaders fired up to continue leading around building affordable housing solutions in this city. Now we have 2 successful program models, a community that's constantly emailing us asking when's the next event, industry champions and leaders ready to support, and a full online curriculum. FutureBUILDS, friends, is ready to scale. We're ready to continue this work to diversify real estate development and platform BIPOC leaders, and we're ready now to bring it coast to coast. And we couldn't have done it without our support from FSC, from the Future Skills Center. And it is my hope that over the next 10 years, when youth workers like myself back in the day are on the ground, confronted by young people in dire need of housing solutions in this city, we will have a wide variety of culturally appropriate options developed and run by community to offer them, with FutureBUILDS alumni and graduates at the heart of those solutions. Thank you very much, everyone.